Hey guys, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to talk about building a sleep system for backcountry hunting and backpacking. Speaking from experience, it can be tough to get good sleep in the backcountry. The ground is lumpy, you might be cold, and you're in an environment that you're not familiar with. And this presents a big problem because if you're not getting good sleep, you're not going to recover well, and it can easily lead to mental and physical deterioration over the course of your trip. Or at least you're not going to feel great, and it will be harder to show up day after day with the energy and positive mentality required to be successful. So it's easy to understand why your sleep system is so important, and I think it's worth testing and refining so you can be comfortable and get the best sleep possible in the backcountry. Today, we're specifically going to talk about choosing a sleeping bag, pad, and pillow. There's so many options out there, but this episode will help you understand your choices and help you get a better idea of exactly what you're looking for. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this podcast, if you've learned something new, please support the podcast by sending an episode to a friend, by rating it 5 stars on whatever platform you listen on, or dropping a comment. All of these things will help the podcast grow, and together we'll help more people get outside and into hunting, which is what Persistence Outdoors is all about. So thank you so much for your support, and we will start off by talking about sleeping bags. So sleeping bags are important for your sleep because they keep you warm. That's probably obvious. There are different things you could use. You could use a blanket or a quilt, but sleeping bags are the most versatile form of bedding for backpacking and camping in general. So that's what we're going to focus on here. The first choice you have when thinking about sleeping bags is, do you want a down sleeping bag or a synthetic sleeping bag? And what we're referring to here is the fill, the stuff that gives it loft and helps keep you warm. There's pros and cons to both. A down sleeping bag is generally going to be a little bit more expensive, maybe a little bit more fragile, just depending on the construction. But down generally has a better warmth to weight ratio than synthetic fill. The other nice thing about down is that it can compress to a very small size. So you can have a fully functional warm sleeping bag that fits a whole adult in it. And if it's filled with down, it can also compress very small and take up less room in your backpack, which is also nice because when you're out on a long trip, you're going to have lots of things in your backpack, lots of food. Maybe you're hauling back meat and you need that space. And so having something that can compress down small is a huge advantage. So down in some ways is really a godsend because it's light, it's warm, and it compresses small. So why would you choose a synthetic bag instead of a down sleeping bag? That's a good question. Well, down has one major weakness, and that is if it gets wet, it takes a long time to dry out, and when it's wet, it loses its loft, meaning it won't keep you warm anymore. Whereas synthetic bags, if they get wet, they will lose some loft, but they are able to still trap some air. The synthetic fill is still able to trap some air and still be able to keep you warm even when they're wet. It's not going to be as warm as when they're dry, but they can still keep you warm. And in certain situations, that could be a lifesaver. What if your gear gets wet on the second day of your 5-day hunt? Or what if the temperatures are dropping and your down sleeping bag gets wet and your other clothing is wet? Well, all of a sudden you're out of luck, whereas a synthetic sleeping bag could keep you warm and in certain scenarios could save your life. Additionally, synthetic bags are typically a little bit more durable than down bags. And I say typically because there are so many different sleeping bags out there that there are going to be manufacturers that make very durable down bags. And there's other manufacturers who are going to be trying to make the lightest down bag possible, and it might be less durable. But typically, a synthetic sleeping bag can take a little bit more abuse. You don't have to worry about it getting wet because it will dry out. You don't have to worry as much about it getting dirty because it's very easy to clean. You just throw it in your washer and then let it dry out. And you generally just don't have to think about it as much as you need to think about your down to make sure that that down fill stays dry and lofty. The choice of fill in your sleeping bag generally comes down to personal preference. For most people, I would recommend a down sleeping bag. And if you're worried about it getting wet occasionally, you can even look for a down sleeping bag that's been treated with a durable water repellent, DWR. And that will actually help the fill dry out faster and resist getting saturated with water. Now, the times when I would recommend a synthetic sleeping bag are if the price point of down is too high, if you are very hard on your gear, or if you live in a wet climate or foresee your gear getting wet. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and lots of people in the Pacific Northwest might choose a synthetic sleeping bag because if they get rained on, or even if there's significant condensation in their tent, they want to stay warm. So those are my recommendations, but just choose something that seems right for you and for maybe 80% of the situations that you think you'll find yourself in. The next thing to look at when you're choosing a sleeping bag is the temperature rating. And usually sleeping bags are tested with a standardized test, either the European norm test, which is abbreviated to EN, or the International Standard Organization test, which is abbreviated to ISO. The European norm is kind of an older test. The newer one is the ISO. So before a sleeping bag goes to retail, it will be tested using one of these standardized tests, and the test will determine a temperature at which someone can sleep in the sleeping bag and still feel comfortable. And most reputable outdoors brands are going to get their sleeping bags tested using one of these tests. Now, how you experience temperature will always be somewhat subjective, right? But there are 3 things you need to know about temperature ratings for sleeping bags. The first thing is that these standardized tests will determine a comfort and a limit rating. The comfort rating is the temperature at which someone who gets cold easily might still feel comfortable in the bag. And the limit rating is the temperature at which someone who doesn't get cold easily might still feel comfortable in the bag. Clear as mud, right? Well, the second thing you need to know is that the limit rating is typically used for male bags, while the comfort rating is typically used for female bags. And this is assuming that females will feel cold easier. That's actually not just an assumption. I think there's data to back that up. But if you are shopping for a male sleeping bag, know that you're looking at the limit rating, not the comfort rating. And vice versa. If you're shopping for a female sleeping bag, know that you're looking at the comfort rating, and there should also be a limit rating. And then the third thing that you need to know is that the number in the name of the bag doesn't always match the temperature rating. So why are these 3 things important? Well, let me give you an example. For a long time, I've used a bag that's labeled 20 degrees. And before I knew all of this stuff, what I thought was that I could go out, and as long as the temperatures didn't get down below 20 degrees, I would be comfortable in my sleeping bag. Well, not so fast, right? Because the 20 degrees is actually closer to the limit of the bag. And I'm a person who gets cold easily. Even though I'm a dude, I'm not a big guy, I don't have a lot of body fat, and it's just harder to regulate my temperature. So to feel comfortable, I generally need more insulation. So I've got this 20-degree bag, right? And at some point, I'm wondering, why do I feel cold when it's 32 degrees out and I'm in a 20-degree bag? And so over time, I was wondering, well, maybe my bag's getting old, maybe it's not working as well. And that could be partially true. But then I looked at the comfort and the limit rating for my bag. Well, it turns out the limit rating is 23 degrees. So remember, the bag is a 20-degree bag, or that's in the name, but the limit is actually 23 degrees. So they've rounded a little bit. 3 degrees isn't a huge difference, but it still is misleading, right? And then the comfort limit is actually 34 degrees. So for someone like myself who gets cold easily, it's likely that I'm going to be uncomfortable sleeping in that bag under 34 degrees, which I definitely experienced. And so if you're shopping for a sleeping bag, don't just look at the name. Make sure to also find that comfort and limit rating, and then think about the nighttime lows that you are going to encounter. So if you're hunting in the fall, maybe it gets down into the 30s at night. You'll want a bag that is rated for at least 30 degrees, but preferably lower. And if you're like me, you'll want a bag that has a comfort rating of at least 30 degrees. So in my experience, a 20-degree bag is super versatile for 3 seasons: for summer backpacking, for spring and fall hunts. It can be really good. If you get too warm in the summer, you can just open it up. And if you're too cold in the late fall or the early spring, you can put some more layers on and you'll generally be fine. Now, I like to be a little bit warmer, so I'm now running a 15-degree down sleeping bag, and I think that's great for most of what I want to do. If you're planning to hunt in extremely cold weather or in the winter, you might look into getting a 0-degree bag. Now, as you get lower and lower temperature ratings, the bags are likely to become heavier and heavier and less compressible because you are adding more and more fill. So that might be the reason why you wouldn't just get a 0-degree bag in the first place. 1, because it could be really warm in the summer, and 2, because it's likely to be bulkier and heavier than a 20-degree bag. But if you had to choose one, I would recommend for most people somewhere in the 15 to 20 degree range, unless you're certain you will be encountering frigid weather. All right, so if you've determined what type of fill you want and the temperature rating you're looking for, you're honestly halfway there. After that, you can compare and contrast sleeping bags by their weight, their compressed size, their shape, their features, and all of these are somewhat subjective. They're pretty easy to find online in the descriptions of the products. So I'm not going to go too deep into them. You'll notice I didn't talk about fill power and fill weight when it comes to down, because with sleeping bags, all of this stuff is going to be listed pretty clearly. And with the temperature rating, you don't need to think about fill power and fill weight as much as you would with something like a down jacket. Now, if you do want to learn all about that, feel free to check out episode 19, Deciphering Down. And there I explain all about fill power and fill weight and how to compare different down products. But again, for sleeping bags, that temperature rating takes a lot of the guesswork out of the equation. Now, before we move on, I want to give you 2 quick recommendations just to give you a place to start if you are searching for a sleeping bag. These are both sleeping bags that I have used. I haven't used lots of sleeping bags, but I can tell you about these ones, and then you can compare these with other ones if you'd like. So for a synthetic option, I have used a North Face Cat's Meow sleeping bag for over 10 years. And It is not the lightest sleeping bag, it is not the warmest sleeping bag, but I can tell you it's pretty much the same sleeping bag that I bought over 10 years ago. The zipper sticks a little bit more, but the thing has been incredibly durable. And I used it all growing up. I used it in rain, in snow, in warm weather, all sorts of different situations. It's definitely got wet. It's definitely got dirty. I've washed it, and the thing is still functional. I don't use it as my main sleeping bag anymore because I think it has lost a little bit of loft over the years, but I keep it as a backup, and it's been really great value for the under $200 that I spent on it. And if you wanted to get something that's just super durable, really low budget, you could look at a North Face Cat's Meow. And there are more modern options that are even better than the bag that I've been using. Now, I have recently switched to a down sleeping bag. I got it as a gift, and it's a Marmot 15-degree sawtooth down sleeping bag. This is a decent upgrade over my last sleeping bag because the limit rating is 15 degrees, whereas the Cat's Meow sleeping bag had a limit rating of 23 degrees. So I have about an 8-degree, nearly a 10-degree difference in warmth rating there. And the down bag is more compressible and lighter than the Cat's Meow bag that I was using. So those are two options to look into. I think the biggest takeaway from the sleeping bags that I have used is that I have gone on many, many, many backpacking and hunting trips and adventures, and I've used sleeping bags that cost less than $250, and I've had a great time and largely positive experiences. So you can go out and easily find sleeping bags that cost upwards of $500, but in reality, unless you're really hardcore or you have a very specific use case, it's likely that you will be able to get away with something much less expensive and still have a great time in successful hunts. All right, let's move on to talking about sleeping pads. When it comes to sleeping pads, there are two main options: inflatable sleeping pads and foam sleeping pads. The advantages of an inflatable sleeping pad are that they can be very lightweight, they pack down to very small sizes, and they generally can be more comfortable than foam sleeping pads because they tend to be thicker than foam pads. Foam pads, on the other hand, are advantageous because they are cheap, they're indestructible, you can't pop them, right? And you don't have to blow them up. So you can just throw it down and you're ready to sleep. Most foam pads designed for backpacking are very thin. They're really a lot like a yoga mat, and I wouldn't recommend only using a foam pad. I don't think you'll be comfortable. There's some people who do find them comfortable or who are just tougher than I am. But for the most part, I would recommend an inflatable pad. However, sometimes it comes in really handy to have a foam pad, either to layer pads and give you more insulation, or just to have the foam pad around camp. You can sit on it, you can fold it up and use it for different things. And that can be really nice if it's wet or you're trying to sit on snow. Sleeping pads designed for backpacking will often be rated with an R value. And the R value gives you an idea of how resistant to heat transfer the sleeping pad is. The R actually stands for resistance, and it's resisting the flow of heat. So it's a linear scale, and most pads fall between 1 and 7. And when I say it's a linear scale, I mean that a pad that has an R value of 1, if you stacked that with another pad that has an R value of 1, it would equal a pad that has an R value of 2. Or if you had 3 pads that had an R value of 1 and you stacked them, they would equal a pad that has an R value of 3. So it's completely linear. Every number is adding a equal unit of heat resistance. So this is important because if you are sleeping in cold weather and you just put your sleeping bag on the ground and the ground was cold or even frozen, that would zap a lot of heat. You would just be losing heat from you through your sleeping bag into the ground. And all that insulation in your sleeping bag that's underneath you is compressed, making it a little bit less effective. So on cold ground, you want to have something with a decent R value that can help insulate you from the ground. You could also have a thick inflatable sleeping pad, say it's 3 inches thick and you're not touching the ground at all. But if it has a low R value, you could still get heat transfer through there and it could feel like sleeping on air. And if the air around you is cold, your sleeping pad is going to be cold as well. So you can use this scale to determine what sort of sleeping pad you need for different temperatures. And generally the scale goes something like this. For frozen ground and cold temperatures outdoors, you'll want an R value of 5 or more. So if you're hunting in winter and the ground is actually frozen and the air around you is cold, you want a higher R value. Now for 3-season use, meaning spring, summer, and fall, anything from 2.5 to 4 on the R value scale is going to be fine. And you can kind of adjust that just depending on if you get cold easily or if you retain heat well, and also based on your sleeping bag. If you have a really warm sleeping bag, you might not need as high of an R value. Or if you don't have a great sleeping bag, if it's kind of cold, you might want to get something that does have a higher R value. So anything in that 2 to 4 R value range is going to be great for 3-season use. And if it does get really cold, you can always bring a foam pad to layer with, and that will help give you some extra insulation. And then finally, for summer or hot climates, you might want to look at something that has an R value from 0 to 2. I've talked about getting cold a lot. Being too hot when you're trying to sleep can be just as bad. So if you know you're someone who gets really hot when they sleep, or you know you will be in warm overnight temperatures, look for something with a lower R value. The other things you want to consider when shopping for a sleeping pad are the dimensions, especially the thickness and width. So the thickness has a lot to do with comfort, especially if you are a side sleeper. I generally fall asleep on my side. It is very hard for me to fall asleep on my back. And so I want something that is thick enough that my hip and my shoulder won't be digging into the ground when I'm sleeping on it. Other people are fine sleeping on their back and they could go with something thinner. And of course, a thinner pad is going to be a little bit lighter and it's going to take less air to inflate. So that's why you might want a thinner pad. Now, you also want to look at the width. One common complaint with inflatable sleeping pads is that you can lie on your back, but then your arms fall off the side of the pad. And it's a really sort of strange feeling because you're not used to it when you're sleeping in your bed at home. So if that's annoying to you, you may want to get a wider pad that can accommodate your arms. And also, if you move around a lot when you're sleeping, having a wider pad can help so that you don't fall off your pad. Sometimes with those inflatable pads, you'll get to the edge and then it kind of squirts out from underneath you. So a wider pad can be a huge benefit when you're trying to sleep in the backcountry. You'll also want to consider the length. Some people like a shorter pad to save weight, and they will use a shorter pad and a pillow, or they'll use that short pad under their torso and something under their feet, or they just don't worry about the insulation for their legs. Other people find it very important to have a full-length pad that accommodates their head, torso, and legs. So it's really personal preference, and you can try different things to find something that works for you. And I would recommend that you test these things out. Get your entire sleeping system out, get your sleeping bag, your pad, and your pillow, and take a nap in it, or at least lie down and feel how it all works together. Because you could buy something and think, oh, that's great, but then find out that your sleeping bag is too narrow for your shoulders, or your sleeping pad is really uncomfortable when you sleep on your side. So test these things out and make sure they're comfortable before you're deep in the backcountry. The last major thing I will look at for a pad is compressed size and weight. High-end pads can compress down to a very small size when they are deflated, even the size of a water bottle, and they're really nice because they just don't take up much space in your pack. They can be very comfortable. The problem is they're going to cost you a lot of money. New pads that have some insulation and also pack down very small and are very lightweight can run even into the $200 range. And so that's a lot of money to spend on a sleeping pad. Now, you can certainly find less expensive pads that are going to be equally comfortable and may have insulation, but they are likely to be heavier and bulkier. So keep in mind there's a trade-off there, and you'll just have to decide for yourself what you're willing to pay. So finally, before we move on to talking about pillows, let me give you a couple of recommendations for sleeping pads. And all of these pads I do have experience with, whether from owning or borrowing them. So the first one is the Climate Static V2. Climate is spelled K-L-Y-M-I-T. This is probably the best budget inflatable pad on the market. You can get it for like $60. There's an insulated and an uninsulated version, and it just works. It feels good, especially when you're on your back. It's a little bit thin for side sleeping, but if you were a back sleeper, you could probably get the insulated version of this and be just fine and never even consider spending a lot of money on a sleeping pad. Now, if you want another inexpensive option, you can always get a Thermarest Z Lite. That's going to cost you around $50, and it's a foam pad. It folds sort of like an accordion, and it's pretty decent. It's not the most comfortable, but it's indestructible. You'll have it forever. And sometimes I like having one of those to layer underneath an inflatable sleeping pad for very cold conditions. Now, what I usually use is an old version of the Nemo Tensor, and this is a high-end inflatable sleeping pad model. It's about 2.5 or 3 inches thick when inflated, and it's full length, but it's also very light. It's about 16 ounces, maybe less, and it's smaller than my Nalgene water bottle when I roll it up. So a Nemo Tensor, a lot of people really like those, especially the insulated version. That's pretty popular now. And so it's going to cost you some money because it is high end. It's going to be, I think, over $200 if you buy it new. However, you might be able to check a place like REI Used and find it for a steep discount. That's how I got mine. I got it for like $60 instead of the MSRP of $200 something. And so it's always worth checking your local gear garage or REI Used or looking for it on sale, and you can get a really nice sleeping pad for a lot less money. Another sleeping pad that is equivalent to the Nemo Tensor is the Thermarest Neo Air. It's also just a high-end, thick, full-length, very compressible sleeping pad. It's going to go for a similar price to the Nemo Tensor, but I have used that before and it's very comfortable. And so if you're looking for the most comfy, the most lightweight option, those are 2 pads to look for. So now you've got your sleeping bag and your sleeping pad figured out. What about a pillow? Well, some people don't even use a pillow, and that was me for a while. I just figured I would be tired enough to sleep. I sometimes tried to use a jacket as a pillow, or my pack, or a stuff sack with extra clothes stuffed into it. And all of these were suboptimal for sure. I had lots of nights with terrible sleep. And often I just kind of chalked it up to other things. But recently I realized there's no reason why I shouldn't bring some sort of pillow, especially if it is going to significantly improve my sleep, which I think it will. So I set out on a mission to find a pillow. And throughout my time backpacking and hunting, I've tried all the different types of pillows. I've tried the inflatable pillows. I've tried using some sort of foam sitting pad instead of a pillow. I've tried a stuff sack with clothes in it. I've tried my pack, like I said. I've tried the crushed foam pillows. And all of them have their pros and cons, but I think it comes down to an inflatable versus a foam pillow. So inflatable pillows are great because just like inflatable sleeping pads, they pack down to nothing and they can be very, very lightweight. The problem is they can be very uncomfortable. When you inflate an inflatable pillow up all the way, it becomes very bouncy and it's easy for your head to roll off or move to one side, and it doesn't really cradle your head in the way that a soft foam pillow will. Another issue is that they often slide right off of your sleeping pad. So especially if they're made from a similar material, it's kind of like a slick nylon or synthetic material, and you stack your inflatable pillow on your inflatable sleeping pad, there's no friction to keep that there. And so it can just slide out from under your head. And then throughout the night, you're trying to find your pillow and put it back under your head. So unless the inflatable pillow is designed very well, it can be kind of a pain. And personally, I don't find them very comfortable. Your other option is going to be a crushed foam pillow. And this will have a fill made out of foam that kind of feels like packing peanuts if you squeeze it. And the crushed foam allows for some loft while still being very light and being decently packable. And so the crushed foam pillow behaves a little bit more like the pillow you might have at home. If you have like a My Pillow, for example, I think that is the same sort of crushed foam idea that you'll find in some of these camping and backpacking pillows. And they're generally going to be easier to use and more comfortable than an inflatable pillow. The problem is with a foam pillow, it takes up more space. You have to deal with the bulk of that pillow. It can be heavier than an inflatable pillow, or it will most likely be heavier than an inflatable pillow. And so you're trading off that space and weight for additional comfort. Now, at some point, I just figured that I can deal with the extra bulk because I want to sleep better at night. And one nice thing that I noticed about a crushed foam pillow is that you can actually use it as a shooting bag. So if you're setting up a shot, you can use the pillow on a log, or you can use your backpack for your front support and use your crushed foam pillow under the stock of your rifle for a rear support. And that makes it actually a really nice multi-use piece of equipment. So if you're on the fence about it, remember that there are other uses for that pillow than just sleeping. Now, the final thing to say about foam pillows is that they may not provide the loft that you need if you're a side sleeper. So with an inflatable pillow, you can just inflate the pillow more to get the loft that you need, and you could easily get 3 or 4 inches. But with a crushed foam pillow, you might not get as much loft, and it can be tricky. It just depends on the pillow. So what did I choose after searching for and testing some pillows? Well, I ended up going with neither an inflatable or a crushed foam pillow. At some point, I had decided that I would go with a crushed foam pillow. And so I was testing a Thermarest compressible pillow, which is actually really a great pillow. And I tested that versus a MyPillow travel pillow, which is just a mini version of the normal MyPillow. And those were about the same in comfort. But I actually found that I can roll up my big down jacket in a cotton bag. And that made a more comfortable pillow than any of my other options. So I've essentially tried this before by putting extra clothes in a stuff sack, but there's a few reasons why it works now when it didn't in the past. First of all, a lot of stuff sacks are made of some sort of uncomfortable nylon or synthetic material. So you put clothes in there, but then you still have your face up against this slick, rough synthetic material that's just not that comfortable. So I found a cotton bag that originally had like a set of bed sheets in it. And this cotton bag was about the right size for a pillow. And then I took my big puffy down jacket and I found a way to fold it so that it's about rectangular, and I stuffed it in that cotton bag. And the cotton bag has a string around one end of it that you can tie, and that way it keeps some tension on the fill being my down jacket, and helps to have some shape and some loft. And so with that cotton bag, it feels fine against my face, and it's the right size to contain my down jacket and give it enough loft for me to sleep on my side. And after testing that against my other pillow options, it was clearly the winner. Now, there's one other reason why it works now when it didn't in the past, and that's because I got a warmer sleeping bag. So in the past, I would often be going to bed wearing my down jacket. And if I did that, then I wouldn't have any extra clothing to put under my head. But in this case, I've gotten a warmer, lighter sleeping bag, and I've been able to go to sleep in it in just my base layers or even just in my underwear. And that means I actually do have my down jacket available to use as a pillow in all but the most frigid temperatures. So if you have a big down jacket, a big puffy, and you find the right bag for it, you can even make your own bag or cut it down to size. You may be able to make your own stuffed pillow, and it could be more comfortable than some of these other options. Now, that's not to say there aren't good backpacking pillows out there. So I've got a couple recommendations for you. If you're looking for the most inexpensive option, just go on Amazon and buy a travel pillow. There's lots out there. The one that I tested was the MyPillow travel pillow. I think it's actually called the multi-use MyPillow. And it's just smaller. It's maybe a little over a pound. And it's made with that crushed foam. And it feels a lot like a pillow you would use at home. And it was only $20. So if you're just trying to find something that's inexpensive and you don't mind the extra bulk, get one of those and it will be very comfortable. You can test it and kind of get a feel of how much loft it gives you and if that's enough for you. If you want to step up a little bit, you can get a Thermarest compressible pillow. And what makes these really nice is that they have a cinch that helps to change the shape of the pillow and give it more loft. So I tested, I think it was the small version. If I had gone with the Thermarest pillow, I would have got a medium or large version. But that was maybe the next best for comfort because I could change the shape and get a little bit more loft for sleeping on my side. It had a little fold in the cover that you could roll the pillow into, so it compressed down pretty small. And I know people who have used these pillows and really, really like them. If these pillows are too heavy or too bulky for you, there is an answer, and that's the combo pillow. And the most popular or most well-known combo pillow is the Nemo Pillow. That's FILLO. And the Nemofillo has a inflatable portion, but then there's a sleeve or a pillowcase on top of it that has a layer of foam. And so you can adjust the height, the loft that you get on the pillow, so that you can sleep on your side and be comfortable. But then there's a piece of foam where your face actually hits the pillow. And so you get all the advantages of the foam on your face. And that's one of the pain points with most inflatable pillows, is just how it feels against your face. Now, the Nemofillo is going to be a little bit more expensive. I think they have an older version and a newer version. And the newer version is super lightweight. It's like a matter of ounces. And so if you have the money, if you want to spend $65 on a pillow, by all means, get the Nemofillo, and I think you will be happy with it. All right, guys, I hope this was helpful for you. Now is a good time to be thinking about your sleep system. Summer is a great time for backpacking, and it's also a chance to start testing and adjusting your kit before the fall hunting seasons. I think that's it for today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out via the Persistence Outdoors Facebook or Instagram page. Drop a comment, shoot me an email, whatever feels natural for you, and I will do my best to respond. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you later.